Today we shall be looking at epistolary novels. So now let's look at what an epistle is and what an epistolary novel is. An epistle is a letter, and Alexander Pope wrote a number of epistles. We shall be doing those in a separate video. For now, we are looking at epistolary novels. It is a novel in which letters are used for communication and the narration happens through those letters. So, in an epistolary novel, you don't have the third person narrator, what is known as the omniscient narrator, which means a narrator who is standing perhaps outside the story and he can see all the characters in the novel and he knows about all these characters and their motives. So that is a different kind of a narrator, the omniscient narrator or the third person narrator. But what happens in an epistolary novel is that the characters within the novel become the narrators. So there's no outside narrator. The narrators are all characters within the novel and they are presenting their own point of view. So there is a certain psychology involved in this because the narrators, the letter writers are expressing, it's a kind of loud thinking and they are expressing their own points of view. And so the epistolary novel became a kind of precursor to the psychological novel later on. Letters have always been written either to entertain or to instruct. So, letters basically they're a form of communication. A person communicates whatever is going on in his mind or whatever is going on around him through the medium of letters. But when we look at letters in connection with the epistolary novel, what is happening is that a series of letters and letters written from one character to another, then a response from that character to this person, then someone else is writing something else, and those letters go back and forth and they form the content of the novel. Now, somewhere in the late 17th century, there was a writer called Afra Ben. And this Afra Ben experimented with this epistolary form, but the person who really brought this epistolary novel into prominence is Samuel Richardson. So, Samuel Richardson is the name of the writer who made the epistolary novel really well known. Now, we all know that the 18th century saw the establishment of the English novel as a form of writing. And so several schools of writing came up, and the epistolary form of the novel was one of those schools. Now, Samuel Richardson wrote 3 novels which we may mention here. He has written others, but we are concerned with three. He wrote Pamela or Virtue Rewarded in the year 1740. Then he wrote Clarissa, 1748. He wrote Clarissa, which is, one of the longest novels if you go by the word count. Now, Clarissa, or The History of a Young Lady. This is 1748 49. And then the third novel is Fanny Hill, or The Memoirs of a Lady of Pleasure. Now, this is 1748. Samuel Richardson referred to his own style of writing these epistolary novels as letter writing to the moment. Those letters and that style of writing was writing to the moment. He never called himself the writer or the author. He always referred to himself as the editor, which means what he's trying to say is that everything by way of content is coming from the characters themselves, and he is the editor of all this. So, this form of writing is going to provoke a lot of reactionary literature. Let's look at what Pamela or Virtue Rewarded is all about. We'll just take a very brief look at this novel. So, there's this young girl called Pamela Andrews, and she's just 15 years old. And she's working as a companion to an old lady, and this old lady dies. Now, this old lady has a son called Mr. B. And Mr. B should have sent away Pamela to his sister. Since, now the mother is no more, and so for the sake of decorum and this girl's honor, he should have sent this servant girl either to his sister, or he should have, just sent her back home. He doesn't do either of these things. On the other hand, he starts making sexual advances towards this girl, and now this girl is going to feel harassed. She's going to write to her father about it, she's going to write to her mother about it, and they are going to reply to her, and this thing is going to go on. But somewhere in the pages of this novel, you get to see scenes which reveal Pamela as a kind of plotter. It's not as if she is against those sexual advances. She's aiming for something higher. So she belongs to the lowest of the low when you talk of the social class. And what she's aiming for is marriage to this Mr. B. He should make an offer of marriage to her. That's what she wants. So there are scenes of her actually in intimate, compromising positions with a servant of the house, and she has left the door of the bedroom open. She knows that Mr. B will walk in any moment, and things like this. So this novel actually, aroused a lot of reactions and responses. One of the things that, this novel is presenting before us is the idea of class and marriage between people belonging to these two different classes. When the two partners belong to a single class, The relationship is of a certain kind, and the problems too are of a certain kind. But when the marriage partners, one of them belongs to this class and the other belongs to that class, then the relationship takes on a different color. And not only that, the problems too are going to be very, very different. So now, Henry Fielding, he retaliated, he responded, in fact, he reacted, and he wrote a parody of Pamela called Shamela. Now, in Pamela, Pamela is presented as if she's a virtuous girl, virtue rewarded. Ultimately, she gets to marry that Mr. B. So her virtue is rewarded. What is the virtue? That she didn't succumb to that man's sexual advances. And what is the reward? She gets to marry that man. Now, Henry Fielding was opposed to this idea. What he felt was that Pamela was not a virtuous girl. In fact, she was a schemer, she was a plotter, and she was plotting and scheming to somehow get that man to marry her. And Samuel Richardson had not brought this out openly. And so Henry Fielding wrote Shamila, and his heroine is, very openly a plotter or a schemer. So, all these things we get to see in the epistolary novel. Now, there was this novelist called Fanny Burney, and she wrote Evelina. Initially, this novel is a very, very well known novel, but she wrote it, she didn't mention her name. It came out as an anonymous piece of writing. And she too referred to herself as the editor, from an anonymous editor. So, this is another novel in the epistolary form. Jane Austen too tried her hand at writing a short epistolary novel, and the name is Lady Susan. So, all these ideas are contained in the epistolary novel. The epistolary novel, or the style of writing these kinds of novels, they faded out. They couldn't last very long. So somewhere towards the latter part of the 18th century, this style of writing finally almost faded out.